people resonate with this distinction between managing and leading, mostly because they've never thought about it before. And I think that's the main point, is that it's not an either or, it's really a both and. We really can't be good leaders if we don't manage well. And good management can lead to good leadership, but they are distinct in a number of ways.
Welcome to Director's Circle, a podcast featuring insight from music educators and school leaders discussing their philosophies on the administrative leadership of a comprehensive music program. I'm Doug Conrad, and I'm coming to you live from my one-bedroom apartment in Western Maryland. Let's begin. Hello and welcome to Director's Circle. I'm Doug Conrad. Thank you so much for tuning in. Summer is just underway, and whether you have the full 3 months off or just a few weeks depending on when your summer music program may begin, I hope that you're having a relaxing time and are gearing up for your upcoming school year. But if you have a moment and would like to have some more professional development opportunities before the school year began, make sure to head on over to Facebook and liking our page under Director's Circle, or going to iTunes or Google Play Music and subscribing, so that way you can stay updated on all future episodes throughout the entire summer. Our guest today is Dr. Ramona Wis, and my interview with her in this episode is very special to me for many reasons, especially since she is our first female guest on the show, as well as being an author of a book that I have been really reading a lot throughout the past several months. Her book, The Conductor As Leader, is one that I came across on Amazon several months ago when I was scrolling through some books on the topic of leadership. And after purchasing the book, reading the book, and applying some of the principles towards leadership as a music educator into my own teaching practice, I can say that it is a valuable resource, and I'm very excited to bring her on today for the episode. So now, to tell you a little bit more about Dr. Wis. Dr. Ramona Wis is a professor of music and director of choral activities at North Central College in Naperville, Illinois. She conducts the concert choir, chamber singers, and women's chorale, and teaches courses in conducting, music methods, and servant leadership. Dr. Wis's book, The Conductor As Leader, Principles of Leadership Applied to Life on the Podium, has quickly become a leadership classic among conductors and music teachers, as well as those interested in leadership outside the music profession. She has written for the Choral Journal, Music Educators Journal, Teaching Music, and the China-Europe International Business School Review. Dr. Wis has served as president of the American Choral Directors Association in Illinois, and has also served on the executive boards for ACDA and IMEA. She has sung under Robert Shaw, James Levine, and Margaret Hillis, and has conducted and performed in professional, theatrical, community, and academic settings for more than 35 years. Dr. Wis, thank you so much for joining us today.
Well, you're quite welcome, Doug. It's good to be here with you.
Yes, we've been greatly looking forward to this. This is a very special episode of our podcast, specifically dealing with leadership. I know you are a very prominent authority in the music education profession, specifically with this topic. So anyway, before we get into some of that topics with leadership, could you tell us a little bit about yourself and your professional background?
Sure. I think it's probably a fairly traditional path. I started as a high school choral conductor, did that for 6 years, and really that was my passion. That was what I thought I was going to do for the rest of my career. And you know how life works. Sometimes things lead you in a different direction. I had an opportunity to be a college teacher, actually at a university, Northern Illinois University, for what I thought was going to be 1 year as a fill-in, and it turned into 10. And then at that point in time, I had already started my PhD and then moved on to teaching at North Central College in Naperville, Illinois, where I'm at now. So I've been teaching more than about 40 years, 41 or 2 years at this point, and primarily choral, but I teach conducting, music ed, and I have taught courses in servant leadership as well. As a performer, I've performed and conducted as well in a variety of settings, so I feel that I can connect to people who work with young singers or people in the church setting or in a professional setting where I've been as well. So I guess I would say that that's a pretty good general overview of where my career path has been.
Great. So to talk about the aspect of leadership in your career, the big thing that you are known for is your book, The Conductor As Leader. So if you could talk about the book a little bit, the general synopsis of what you discuss in your book, but also then if you could dig into a little bit about whenever you conceive the idea to write a book so specific to the topic of leadership as a conductor in a music program, just what kind of things were you working on, what kind of things were you thinking about, and what led to that final product of your well-known book?
Well, you know, what's interesting, I have always been, I've been a book person forever. So I hate to say back in the day, but we don't have as many bookstores as we used to, as we know. But I used to love, and still do, love to go to a bookstore, pick up books, browse through them, have a long cup of coffee. And even when I was just starting my career, I would find myself picking up books that typically would have been listed at that time in the aisle that said management. Interesting sidebar is that now most bookstores have management and leadership in different locations. I know we'll talk about that a little bit later. But I would find these books and I would browse through them, and they were of interest to me, even though I was never in corporate jobs. I never wanted to be in a corporate job, but I would read them and think that's exactly what happens when we are conducting a choir or when we are teaching in a classroom. And one of the things that I think I do well as a teacher and conductor is to connect things that don't seem to be obviously connected. So what started to happen in my mind was I was looking at these principles that I would find in, again, largely corporate derived books, and immediately think about how it applied in a conducting, in a director position. And I don't think I started researching officially till about 2000. It seems to me the summer of 2000 was when I started to write some things, to outline some things. As a teacher conductor, you know this as well, we don't have a lot of free time between September and June. So most of my summers and when I would get a sabbatical, those would be the times I'd go back, read more, start to apply more. And that's really how the book was born, as well as just living life as a conductor and as a teacher and finding successes and finding challenges and scratching my head and wondering how we could do something better. So all of that merged with my discovery of the, again, business-oriented writings of Robert K. Greenleaf, who is well known for servant leadership as a mode of thinking, a way or an approach to leadership. So when I took my ideas that I'd been developing and then learned some of the writings and went to some of the Greenleaf conferences, all of that started to mesh together to me and really led to the formulation of this book. So that's really how it came about. But it was about a 7-year process.
Great. So to touch now a little bit on the book, I remember when I read this would have been back probably in February, the winter of this past year. One of the big things that really stuck out with me was you kind of discussed the topics of leading others or leading specifically students versus managing students. So I didn't know if you could talk a little bit about your philosophy on the differences between those, and then also your philosophy on just leading students in general.
That's a great question. And when I do talk to people about the book or just talk to them about leadership in whatever speaking engagements I have, people resonate with this distinction between managing and leading, mostly because they've never thought about it before. And I think that's the main point, is that it's not an either or, it's really a both and. We really can't be good leaders if we don't manage well. And good management can lead to good leadership, but they are distinct in a number of ways. And in the book, many people will use this model, but Warren Bennis, and I'm looking at it right now, Warren Bennis, from his book on becoming a leader, published in 1989, has this terrific side-by-side list that I'm sure you saw, and it's really the manager does this, the leader does that, and it really shows clearly the distinction. I would say in my own words that managing is really about tasks and usually about keeping things running efficiently as they currently are. And that's a broad statement, it's a generalization, but that's usually what managing is. Leadership is usually, I should say always, about people, or at least involves heavily a people approach, and is really focused on moving forward, on innovation or growth or what's next for us. And when we really think about those two things, we can see how they are interwoven. But it's easy to also move too much to one direction or the other. As busy teachers and conductors, we can get really caught up in management and think that that's leadership. So an example might be, we are organizing our rehearsals, our concerts, our calendars, where people stand, where we get instruments, what music needs to be ordered. We're in that management mode. And then we go into rehearsal, and if we're in chronic manager mode, we get right into the music. We might not even greet the ensemble. We do the same warm-ups. We make no comments because we're in a hurry to get to piece A and fix the problems that we have put on our to-do list, check them off, and send them home. That's a managerial approach to a rehearsal. Now, that doesn't mean we can't do some of those things. We all repeat warm-ups. We all have a to-do list. But that, especially if that's a chronic way of working with an ensemble, that's really the conductor as manager. So the conductor as leader, with the same sensibilities of, I have a concert in a week and a half, here are the issues that aren't fixed. I mean, there's a realism there. The conductor who is a leader will come into the rehearsal with a well thought out plan, will connect always with the ensemble. That could be individually as people are coming in, certainly as a full group. They'll devise the warm-up period to apply to the music so that they're being smart with their time, but they're also thinking about what would be interesting to the people on the other side of the podium, which is not to just simply do the same old, but okay, how are we going to do this and what's it going to relate to? So they're devising a rehearsal that is efficient, is effective, but it's also growth oriented. And as they go through the rehearsal, even as they're stopping to tune and to fix and to release and all of that diagnostic prescriptive work that we do and must do well, even as they do that, the leader will insert a comment about, this is why we do it. Or they'll ask the ensemble, okay, why do you think I've asked you to do this? Or what did we do last week that fixed this problem? What do we need to do now? It doesn't have to be a lecture. It just needs to be an involvement that allows the leader brain to say, I'm going to get some technical things handled so I can sleep better tonight, but I'm going to do it in a way that grows these people that are in front of me, these musicians that I am so blessed to be with. And that's hard to remember sometimes because we're on go, go, go mode. It's going to help those musicians, those singers, those instrumentalists to grow not only for the concert in a week and a half, but for the long run, as people, as musicians, as thinkers, as humans. That's a significant distinction between modes of operating, and it takes time to develop, but it starts with an awareness. And that's the main thing. You must be aware that these are different, and you need to decide for yourself how you want to approach it.
Yeah, and I really like how you mentioned with the mindset of leadership, especially being an awareness. It kind of goes into, I know there's a YouTube video out there of a Tony Robbins presentation where he talks a lot about leadership too, with especially leadership having the knack to really be in the moment to make those game time decisions. And with one of those things with leading versus managing, because I even know in Harry Wong's book, I believe is called The First Days of School, the big classic one. A distinct quote is somewhere along the lines out of that book is something of effective teachers manage classrooms, ineffective teachers discipline classrooms. And this can even kind of go into whoever, and how we define management. But kind of as you discussed too, there are two modes that, and it's not good or bad with leading or managing, but there may come times where if we are in management mode, to just set up an ordeal, or as in sometimes we say in director land, times you need to crack the whip. So how do you still kind of come to those maybe more harsher, rougher moments, we'll say, really embracing that with the leadership mindset to at least kind of gear things around to get everyone involved in the ensemble onto the right path?
Well, Doug, I appreciate that question about the distinction between managing a rehearsal and disciplining a rehearsal. I have not read that book, but I do understand what he's talking about, I think, just by those words, and I think with your question. What I have found is rather than worrying about or anticipating the need to crack the whip or to discipline, first I would say the better we teach, the better we plan, the fewer opportunities will present themselves for disciplining or cracking the whip, as you say. So I think we need to start with that. We need to start with, what am I capable of controlling here? How can I set everyone up for success? And that goes through a whole list right there. Choosing better repertoire, or repertoire that is better suited for the ensemble. Knowing your game plan before you come in. Thinking through, after a rehearsal, how well it went, what you could do next time. That's really saying, as the leader, I'm going to take this responsibility seriously, rather than saying, you need to do this, it's your fault. We get into the kind of shame and blame game. So as a fundamental grounding to this whole discussion, I would say this is really important, that we understand we have great control, great power, and great responsibility to set up this music-making environment in a way that maximizes people's ability to succeed. And yes, for a band or choir, orchestra, jazz band, whatever, to sound great in a public performance. That said, things happen, and for all kinds of reasons. So my experience has been, honesty is powerful, but it has to be honesty without anger, without any kind of personal attack. So if, for example, I'm working with a choir and we've set some goals and the students simply haven't done their part, they haven't memorized, they haven't learned their part of a piece or whatever the goals were. And by the way, I would say it's always better to set goals with the musician's input rather than me saying, we're going to do this by this day, this by this day. So if you get to a point where, especially if time is at a premium and you're close to a performance, you're starting to feel that pressure, it doesn't really help to, quote unquote, crack the whip, to say, hey, get it together or else. There's all kinds of problems with that. And I'm going to be really vocal, I guess, because I've seen this. I have to admit, especially earlier in my career, I've done this. It's not good. Why? Number one, anytime we go to the crack the whip discipline approach, we've failed to some degree because we didn't either set things up or we didn't see the problem early enough in order to make a change, to go, as I talk about in my book, to do a plan B, drop the piece from the program, insert a solo instead of the full choir. There's so many things you can do if you're paying attention as you go through the rehearsal cycle. If you're taking the temperature of the ensemble, if you're thinking about calendar in practical ways, there's all kinds of things you can do to set that up. But we failed because now what we've turned it into is a me versus you. I did my part. I'm working so hard. Look at me, boo-hoo, I'm the director. You didn't do your part. Bad kid. And I'm talking about even if you're dealing with a 50-year-old and a professional, bad person. This is not successful. There's nothing good that comes out of that long term. Now, we all know that we can all respond to short-term threats, as in, we're going to have another rehearsal because you didn't get this right, which I find so ironic because now we're punishing the ensemble with more music making. So what is that all about? So I think people get hooked on this because they'll say, well, it's 2 weeks before the concert. I'm going to have to be cracking the whip today. And essentially, we're teaching ourselves as directors, and we're teaching the ensemble that this must happen, that this is an absolutely unavoidable part of the process to get stressed and upset with each other and blame each other as a part of the process of making music. And I really have to question that. If it happens once, then as you go forward, rethink that and do it differently. Don't get stuck in this, well, I yelled at him and the next rehearsal was great, because you've also lost a lot. Everyone's going to feel good about the concert going well, and memories will fade, and then you'll be right back at it on the next rehearsal cycle. And I don't think we're really teaching our musicians, and I don't think we're developing as directors and as leaders if we always have to go through that default.
Yeah, that's definitely something along the lines I know that I took from a John Maxwell seminar that I saw online a few months ago, where one of the things he talks about, especially as a leader, in so much that we embrace relationships, even more so that's important is the success that we give people to enable them. And along those lines of where he was talking about that, one distinct quote I remember was somewhere along the lines of, when it comes down to leadership, people will always choose success over relationships. So even with those two in mind now, could you talk a little bit about maybe how you've approached your choral groups? Because even if there are some times where it might come down to the wire, you're 2 weeks away from the concert, maybe approaching your rehearsal planning, at least with that component of success in mind, to help lead your groups.
Well, I always tell ensembles that I work with that I will never put them on the stage to embarrass them. And even if they didn't do what they should have done on a particular aspect of the music making, there's nothing to be gained from publicizing that. So, as I'd said earlier, I constantly am reflecting on how it's going. I look at the calendar, I plan my rehearsals, I reflect on what went well, where we need to go. I listen to input, and sometimes I just sense the input. I can read the faces of the ensemble. I can feel the energy when they come in the room or out of the room. Are they excited to be there? Are they talking covertly off to the side like, oh, that didn't go well? I mean, you have to be aware and willing to see the whole picture. Sure, we get into periods where things are tight, and I will try to do whatever I can to provide additional resources. I will try to help mobilize student officers, influential people who can have a quick sectional. I mean, I'll do all of those kinds of things if it gets down to being close to a concert. But I'm also happy to postpone the performance of a piece to another time. Or, as I said earlier, let's say there's a section of a piece that's not coming together, but I have a group of 8 or 12 who could perform it really well. I'll just take that liberty and say, okay, this section is going to be a solo group. I mean, there's all kinds of ways that we can make some adjustments to be sure that they feel that success. But then I always make sure that it's part of the learning. So it's not about bailing people out. It's about setting them up for success. And then afterwards, we have a habit with our ensembles at North Central that the rehearsal after a concert, we do our warm-ups and then we do a debrief. And I call it a debrief. And I say, okay, what did you think? What did you hear? How did you feel? Just give me some feedback. And we get everything from, my mom doesn't really like choir music, but she loved this concert, and we sort of chuckle about things like that. But we get a lot of really insightful comments about how the student felt as they sang a piece and connections happened. Or when they understood that a piece they wrestled with maybe didn't, quote unquote, like very much, how powerful that piece was because they finally got it. So there's all of these things that we do to be sure that on the biggest screen, we're always moving forward to the best of our ability.
For sure. So now to talk about something that you discussed a little while back, and something that's also a major component of your book, is the concept of servant leadership. So can you give your thoughts on that aspect and truly serving others in the context of a rehearsal?
Yeah, I think a number of the things we've talked about would answer that question or start to answer that question. Servant leadership is a name that can be off-putting. So I'm going to start with a little bit of Servant Leadership 101, if I can, because the word servant can mean a lot of things to a lot of people. And so people sometimes hear that phrase and think of it as something weak or something religious or something that's going to be ineffective. And it couldn't be further from the truth on all three of those. Yes, absolutely, the great religions of the world, in particular Christianity, has a lot of commentary about serving others. But if we look, even just take the step back and look at the work of Greenleaf and many others who have written on servant leadership, we see that basically at its foundation, we are, again, growth-oriented. We're here to help the other, the student, the musician, the family member, if you think of it in non-music ways. We're here to help other people move forward. In order to do that, we have to give them what they need, maybe not what they want. So when we are planning our rehearsals, I could say, let's just take the day off. Well, taking the day off is not good or bad. There are times when the ensemble needs a day off, maybe after an intense period of concert preparation. A day off would be great. That honors them, that gives them some free time. It allows for some buffer before the next cycle. But sometimes saying, let's take a day off is not what the ensemble needs, because they really need to engage more deeply. Maybe they need better music. Maybe they need more community. So servant leadership is about understanding that we have skills and opportunities. In this case, where we have the opportunity to direct people, to help guide them and facilitate them to create this amazing musical experience for themselves and for others. So we will use whatever we have to lead them through that process. And the way that we lead them is also serving them, because we stand between the stuff on the page and that end experience. If we don't serve them, then we are likely to be thinking about ourselves, about our egos, about what feels good to us. And we get into that discipline, crack the whip kind of mode. And that doesn't really work, especially long term.
For sure. So now to kind of take that all in, especially then with leadership, it really boils down, especially to relationships. And in our profession, as you know, it's not even just with students. It can go with even with people and advocating for a program, to our colleagues, or even building those relationships with parents. So this may be geared more towards a director entering a new program. But what advice, if any, would you give to a new director coming into a new program, regardless of the medium, choir, band, orchestra, what may have you, and then just utilizing leadership tactics to build relationships with students or even other stakeholders such as parents?
That's a great question, and I do talk about that in the book, because I share an experience from my early teaching in high school where I didn't really understand how to manage this. So I speak from that humble position of having lived through not doing it really well. So I would say I talk about something called the trust paradox, which is to say that when a director comes into a new position, there's a feeling that we want change. We're excited about something new, and who might this be? But there's also this deep adherence to what we know and what we've done and what we're secure with. So that's the trust paradox, is that I really want this security, because then I can trust that I know what's going to happen when I come to rehearsal and what my year is going to look like. But I kind of want something new. So as a new director in a school or a community organization, a professional ensemble, I think there are several things that help. One, do as much research before you even take the job, but certainly coming into the job, do as much research as possible to know what's been done. What is the culture? What's the pace? What are the expectations? How many students do I have? What's the breakdown? Anything that you can find out. Repertoire would be huge. What kind of repertoire did they do? Know exactly, to the degree you can, I guess there's no exactly, but to the degree you can, know as much about the situation as possible. And when you come into the job, listen as much as possible. And again, even in the process of acquiring the job, ask a lot of questions, meet as many of the stakeholders as you can. One of my former students from North Central, who has been teaching for quite some time, he's a terrific educator and leader, came into one of our local high schools probably 8 or so years ago now. And during the summer, when you can't really find people, he was able to convene a large group of students as an incoming director, following someone who had been there for 30 years, I'm going to say. That's always a tough thing. But convened that group, talked to them, listened to them, got their input in June or July. So well before the year started, and with enough time to sort of absorb that and think about that. And then the last piece of that puzzle, I think, would be, and this is probably the hardest piece, this is the piece that for me was difficult when I started teaching, is to change only what you think you really need to change that first year. And the reason is the change is already there in you because you're the new factor. So if everything around the music making process was the exact same, there's still a huge change because the person on the podium is different. So I think minimizing the changes and choosing the few that you really feel that you need to affect will help ease into that transition. So for example, maybe you don't like the fact that the ensembles don't wear uniform attire. And I know that this happens often. You'll go and you'll see a choir concert at a high school and everyone's wearing what they want, and it's really quite distracting. So you might come into that position and think, okay, we're not doing that. We're going to get matching outfits and so forth. If that comes from the students and the parents, then doing that's probably a good thing. But if that's not something you're hearing, you might have to kind of deal with it for a year, maybe educate people on what's a little more appropriate for the stage, but wait on that and put your focus on something that's at the heart of what we do, which is the quality of the music. And even there, you may have to be selective because maybe they've always done a pops concert and that's really not your thing. Maybe the administration has said, we want to have these students go to a contest and we need them to do more legit, quote unquote, music. You have to weigh all that and make your decisions about maybe 2 or 3 changes and then allow the rest to be. Let that be their comfort. And as you build the relationships, then you're going to have the open door. People are going to say, hey, we've been thinking about this. And all of a sudden, now that the relationship between you as the new person and the ensemble is stronger, they'll trust you, and they'll start to encourage you to make those changes.
Great. So let's kind of take that idea now and maybe flip it around a little bit in not that the context of you are the new director in a program, but let's say if you have an established program and I'm a new student coming into your program, what ways specifically, and you can even relate this to your work at North Central College, what ways would you go about cultivating a relationship with someone, let's say if it's the beginning of that fall semester, from that very first rehearsal to even build that relationship or ways to impact their work with you in the program?
It's so important because we can get very stuck in our ways and we're welcoming back students who know exactly how we do things and we just sort of go on our merry way. And here's the new student who's lost. They don't have their friend group. They don't have any sense of what is appropriate and how we do X and how we do Y. So I usually start that process really in the audition process. So I'll be specific to my world right now, but I think it would help the listener here. We audition students, of course, the year prior. So starting in November of any calendar year, we're auditioning students who will be coming in the following fall. And I think that first connection with the student is critical. So I will make sure to greet them, to welcome them. We have current students who help guide them through the audition day. We talk to them. I will follow up with them on email. So we're trying to establish an initial connection that just says, this is a place that you would be welcome and you would find a community that would be helpful to you, not only in your music making, but in your bigger collegiate life. And then as we go through the rest of the process, exactly where we are now, I will send an email. I sent an initial email to the new students that I was going to have in any particular choir. So I teach a number of choirs. So anybody who is new coming into North Central, into the women's chorale, for example, I sent a separate welcome email that they could see the other people coming in, and it was directed at them not only as new incoming members of the women's chorale, but new students to the college, period. Then later, I'll send a full ensemble email, and they'll be a part of that. So I've welcomed them in multiple ways, each time building the population. And then as we actually get on campus and we start the year, we will spend time, especially in these early rehearsals, as everybody typically does, with some kind of exchanging of names and so forth. But through the syllabus, through the structure, I'm pretty structured in my rehearsals, through the structure of the ensemble, and through the peer leaders, the student officers, the other people who've been around a bit. We try to give them a sense, an experiential sense of who we are. And I think a big part of that is being very clear on your mission. With the choirs at North Central, we have a mantra, so to speak. And the mantra is singing for the greater good. We put that in our syllabus and we talk about that from time to time throughout the year. What does that mean? What is the greater good for me as an individual, my greater wellness, my greater understanding of how music connects to everything else? What is the greater good in this community of the ensemble? What does that mean? How do I do my job so that I'm creating a full culture that we can all be proud to be a part of? And then extending that yet again to audiences or the wider world. So this mantra gives us a kind of unifying center that even a new person coming in can go, okay, I think I'm getting the idea of what this is going to be. And then you just simply have to spend time with new people individually. And it could be very simple as just spending a little more time when they are entering the rehearsal, talking with them a little bit after, making sure that they can come to you if they have an idea or question. It is time intensive, but I tend to look at everybody now as though they were my son or daughter. And my husband and I do have a daughter. She's 26 now, so she's not a kid. But I remember when she was in college and how grateful I was for the people that were compassionate to her. She was an out-of-state kid. We live here in the Chicago area. She was in school in Philadelphia. And I was so grateful for teachers who would take the time to help her understand Philadelphia or that institution or whatever. So I feel like it's a karmic kind of exercise to know that everybody who comes into your room, again, even if it's a 50-year-old member of your community choir, is somebody else's spouse, child, grandparent. They're a real person.
Yeah, some really great insight, Ramona. So now to touch on some general questions that we ask all of our guests here on the show. Now this can even get into some specific choral realm stuff. So could you tell us about one or two of your favorite rehearsal tactics?
Yeah, I am a big believer in the use of physical gesture, physical metaphor, I guess I would call it, in the rehearsal. That's something I did my dissertation on a number of years ago, and I continue to develop this. I'm nearing the completion of my 500-hour yoga teacher advanced certification, so there's a lot of body, mind, spirit work, of course, in that realm as well. But in the rehearsal, specifically in a choral rehearsal, we use gesture in conducting type ways, and you could do this in a band, of course. Let's conduct this phrase. Let's conduct in any way that makes sense to you to reach the point of arrival of this arc and then pull it back. We do all kinds of things to help us understand and experience the music more deeply. Let's throw a dart on that release, nice and clean. Everybody throw a dart as you put that final release on. So using gesture allows the body and the mind and the breath, which is a big part of your spirit, to come together, and on a much less interesting description, it just changes things up rather than just sitting and waiting to be told what to do now. So I would say gesture, movement, conducting, those kinds of things, that's a very standard part of my rehearsal.
Yeah, very cool insight to kind of get that physical part into it as well. So now to touch on from your personal or even professional experiences, who are some people that have inspired you in your life and career, and what lessons have you taken away from them?
You know, I saw this question, you had sent this to me ahead of time, and I don't want to over emphasize any kind of religiosity, if that's a word, in my work. But to be authentic, I would have to say Jesus Christ, because I am a Christ follower. It is embedded in everything I do in my life. I don't try to lead with religion. So my students, I'm sure, know where I stand, but I don't proselytize. Even in the book, as you know, because you read it, I have interludes, and the very last interlude is where I said, look, I'm not here to tell you about your religion, your spirituality, but if we're going to look at leadership, we have to look at the life of Jesus Christ. Even people who are not followers of Christ or not Christian or not into religion at any level usually will acknowledge that the historical figure of Jesus was the great teacher, the great leader. And so because this is embedded into my existence, and not in any kind of dogmatic way, it's really just a personal understanding, a personal relationship, and really just an understanding of servant leadership, an understanding of mission, capital M. Why are we here? What's the point of us doing this music thing? I mean, you really start to step back and ask big questions. I look at the life of Christ and I think, well, here's somebody who was always about helping people to move forward in the religious sense, move forward to salvation. In our lives, move forward to something bigger than the individual musician. And so all of my teaching is really wrapped up, all of my teaching and conducting is wrapped up on moving people forward, helping them grow, helping them find agency, helping them to experience something larger than themselves, which is a very healthy thing. I mean, there's data, there's studies that talk about once you get out of yourself, once you get to a bigger mission, a bigger sense of purpose, you become less likely to be depressed or anxious or lost. So that's why I have to come back to the life of Christ as the strongest impact I have on leadership, because it just makes sense. I mean, again, if you're going to get really practical, it makes complete sense. Help other people move forward to something better and bigger, and everybody benefits.
Yeah, that's a really unique response here, because it kind of makes me think of once a John Maxwell seminar I had seen, not to again say John Maxwell, but where once he was entering his previous profession full-time as a preacher, then entering to his now known regard as an authority on leadership. One of the big things I remember and took away from that was, especially whenever he was giving his first initial presentations on characteristics of outstanding leaders to audiences all across the world, one of the big things, and even just in a general sense, that he was even preaching about, was just with the principles that he was going through within his presentations on leadership. A lot of that was still preaching what Christians would say the scripture, and just it's unique how those two very different things almost are so much alike with their fundamental principles. And even I know a previous guest, Stephen Benham, had talked about that too, to touch on the servant leadership aspect in the specific sense of washing the feet of the disciples, and it kind of even just to study the characters from that, it's really unique here. So,
well, and I would add too, in my yoga study, we've done a lot of reading, and I've read the Yoga Sutras, I've read the Hatha Yoga Pradipika. More importantly, probably, and we were talking just a moment ago about the relationship between spirituality and leadership. The Bhagavad Gita, which many people have read probably in a college course, maybe even a high school course, which really is a sort of metaphorical journey between two characters, one of whom is actually God, but under the name Krishna, and the other who is Arjuna, who's the great warrior. And the whole book really takes you through a journey where you come out at the other end understanding these deep principles. So much of the great writings come back to the same kinds of things you would find in the Bible. And more, if you go to the bookstore and you go to the leadership section, which we have now a separate leadership section versus management, there are books that talk about spirituality in the workplace. That's an actual title of a book. So it's not about religion in the workplace. It's about spirituality and how it crosses into what we do. And there's no way I can imagine being a music maker on any level, a director, a performer, whatever it might be, without understanding that spirituality, meaning of the spirit, of the human spirit, of the larger than me spirit, whatever that is, how that couldn't be a part of what we do. That really, I think, is why we are powerfully connected to music, because it does speak to a part of us that is spirit-oriented, that is deeply embedded in our core. So yes, I understand why it's touchy. I handle it carefully. I'm not trying to make anyone into something that they are not, in terms of a religious approach or a sect, but to completely try to separate out the spiritual aspect of our humanity from what we do as a leader, specifically a musical leader, doesn't make sense.
Great. So now to move on to the next one. This is somewhat of a job interview question, sometimes people feel. But now, if you had to think of 3 words that would describe a leader of an outstanding comprehensive music program, what would those 3 words be and why?
Well, I did do some advanced study on this, so I knew you were going to ask this. For me, the 3 words are connected, competent, and clear. So connected meaning connected to the musicians that you are given to lead. And we've talked about that earlier, but knowing them, developing relationships, and really to another degree, being connected with others in your profession so that you can get advice, you can get input, you can see what the world is doing. The second word, competent, we have to know our stuff. We cannot rely only on having great relationships. And I see that too. We see people who are really lovely people who care deeply about their musicians, but they don't have the musical skills to really give them the proper experience. So we have to be competent in our field. We've got to know our craft. And clear, for me, talks about our teaching. And I think that anybody who conducts is a teacher. I don't care if you're conducting at the highest professional level. We're always teaching something about the music, something about the intent, something about how we do it best together with this group of musicians in this real time. And that, I think, are would be three strong words: connected, competent, and clear.
For sure. So regardless of the ensemble, what advice would you give to music teachers to help their students thrive?
I would say challenge them, and that's regardless of their age or their experience, but find where they're at and go just above there. Challenge them so that they know there's a reason to come to rehearsal. There's a reason to do the work that we ask them to do. Many of your listeners will know about Vygotsky's zone of proximal development. I go back to that all the time. Knowing where a student or a musician that you're working with can easily achieve, and then working just above there, not to the point of absolute frustration, but to the point where you have to really engage. That, I think, is really powerful. And I think helping musicians to see making music, art making, as a path to hope, a path to purpose, and to resilience. These are words that we're talking about a lot in today's teaching world, of course. But when they understand that making music gives them a direction, that making music gives them a place because their part in that ensemble is critical. If they're not there, we notice, not just because of the instrument they play or the voice part they sing, but because they're part of the spirit and the culture. So giving them a very clear teaching that music making is a path to hope and to mission, even if they're going to be a neuroscience major. We're not talking about career path. We're just talking about human path. I think those would be two things.
Great. And lastly, what would you like to be remembered as whenever the time comes for you to retire from your profession, even specifically at North Central? Whenever the time comes for you to retire, how would you like to be remembered amongst your students from your time together in your program?
Well, I have several advantages. One is that, of course, we do course evaluations at the end of every term, and I read these, I take them seriously, and I am grateful that students get me. They will write in their evaluations everything from, and I'm not trying to pat myself on the back, but I'm trying to answer the question. They will acknowledge that they have learned and they've been challenged and all of the sort of musically skill-oriented kinds of things. But they do talk about my leadership. They will use the word servant leadership. They'll use the phrase singing for the greater good. So I think even now I'm reaping the benefits of people understanding that what I'm about is using music not as a tool. Sometimes people say, I'm going to use music as a tool to get to this other thing. I think what I would prefer is that people understand that I use the craft of music or experience the craft of music and share that with other people in interesting, creative, innovative ways so that the music is served, but so are the people. And frankly, I have to also say the timeliness of this interview is such that I just received an award last night from Illinois ACDA, which is the American Choral Directors Association. And it's the Harold Decker Award, which is really kind of a lifetime achievement award. And it was really humbling. And many of those same kinds of characteristics were part of that award. And so I think I'm on the right path. I've got, I hope, God willing, many years left of music making, and I'm still every day thinking, how do I get this better? So I guess that's how I'd like to be remembered.
That's great to hear. Congratulations on the award.
Thank you.
All right, well, that wraps up our interview. So, Dr. Wis, thank you again so much for taking the time. A lot of great insight, and especially on the specific topic of leadership. And anyone who is listening again, please make sure to check out her book, The Conductor As Leader. It's available on Amazon as well as other book retailers as well. And again, Dr. Wis, thank you so much for your time and insight.
Thank you, Doug. I really appreciate the opportunity to meet you officially and to talk about things that are near and dear to both of our hearts.
Thank you. This concludes our episode. Many thanks to Dr. Ramona Wis for sharing her time, wisdom, and insights on the principles of leadership applied to the life of a music educator. If you enjoyed today's episode, please make sure to follow our page on Facebook under Director's Circle, and to also go to iTunes and give us a 5-star rating to help our show reach new listeners. This is Doug Conrad saying thank you for listening, and be sure to tune in to the next edition of Director's Circle.